Welcome to the Health and Wealth Power Hour, the podcast that provides you with the knowledge and insights you need to achieve physical, mental, and financial well-being. I'm your host, Harlan Pickett, a business consultant who's passionate about helping people achieve a more balanced and healthier life. Each week, we'll deep dive into topics related to health and wealth, including retirement income planning, innovative healthcare solutions, alternative funded health plans, and specific actions individuals and business owners can take to gain control of their finances, have access to affordable quality health care, and achieve peace of mind. We'll also be joined by innovative experts who will share their knowledge and insights on prevalent topics. So, whether you're looking to grow your wealth or improve your health, you've come to the right place. Get ready to be informed, inspired, and empowered. Let's get started. All right, gang, guess what? It is time for another episode of the Health and Wealth Power Hour. I am Harlan Pickett, your host. Great to be with you today. Man, we got a good one. Have you ever lost your breath? I mean, like really lost your breath? So much so that you're not breathing at all anymore? What if there was an emergency pin that could bring that breath back to you, bring your life back to you? Maybe you know someone, maybe you are someone who has been through an experience like that and survived, but it was very, very difficult situation. What if there was an emergency pin that helped you through that situation, regardless of how you had found yourself in that predicament? Today, we have Joe Nunu with us. He is going to tell us about this incredible invention that he has come up with and the process he's been through. And I'll tell you what, he's got an interesting story too, because he was an anesthesiologist that stepped into the dark side of pharmaceuticals. Thank you so much for being with us today, Joe. Welcome to the Health and Wealth Power Hour.
Thanks so much, and thanks for having me, Harlan.
Yeah, I think that you've got an interesting story to tell, but not just your story, but what you're embracing, and literally a pen to bring people back to life. You were, before we started the show, you were saying that the traditional method that had been taught for that is very ineffective.
Correct. So basically, this is a medication that is a reformulated version of a known molecule. It's a medication that was first developed back in the 60s, approved by the FDA as an extremely safe medication in all the studies they've done. And we used to use it in anesthesia for decades. And it's a very good non-abusable medication. And the way it works is we formulate it to go inside of an auto-injector. That's, a device that automatically injects the medication, much like an EpiPen would deliver epinephrine to somebody having a serious allergic reaction. So this medication is delivered via auto-injector, usually into the shoulder, and triggers the body's natural breathing circuits so that they just begin breathing. And what's really cool about this medicine is while this person is breathing safely, the first responders are able to deliver care, which is something that is not easy to do when you give Narcan. You give Narcan and now they're awake. They're in acute opiate withdrawal because the Narcan blocks all those opiates. And a lot of times they're hurting. They're really upset because they're so uncomfortable and they don't know what's going on. They become combative and it's a danger to themselves and everyone around them while the team is trying to take care of them. So this medicine just makes them breathe. They're sleeping, but they're breathing. And then you can go ahead and take care of them. So that was one part of your question. And the other part of the question that you asked is, what else is this medication used for? So we've talked about drug overdoses, including non-opiate causes of drug overdoses. But really it's for any circumstance where someone has stopped breathing. And that would include drowning victims. That would include cardiac arrest. That might even include people who stop breathing because of severe lung disease like COPD or emphysema. So people start turning blue, they're not getting enough air, you just fall over. This medicine is so safe that you could literally give it to somebody without even knowing why they're not breathing. And worst case scenario, you haven't helped them, but you haven't hurt them. Our first The Hippocratic Oath, people talk about first do no harm. That's a major principle that we're living by. And the first thing I want to do is help people. And at the very least, I'm not going to hurt them. So we deliver it. If it doesn't help, it doesn't help. But at least you've given them a fighting chance.
Was there a certain instance that occurred that made you say there's got to be a better way?
Yeah, so it's interesting. This was kind of more of a blind calling in a lot of ways, for lack of a better term. So right now, when people think about drug overdoses and how to rescue people from drug overdose, they picture Narcan nasal spray, for example, or Narcan. And Narcan is a good medicine that saved a lot of people, but it's also left a lot of people behind. So in 2023, we lost over 100,000 people. That's more than 300 people a day. And the reality is the vast majority of those people succumb to the overdosing effects of fentanyl, which is an extremely potent synthetic opiate. And and the reality is that Narcan was never designed to handle the potency of drugs like fentanyl, nor the doses that are being ingested. Additionally, more and more people are dying from what we call polypharmacy overdoses. So they are a combination of drugs, not just opiates. Sometimes that's tranquilizers or sedatives. Sometimes they're anesthetics, like that they use in the veterinary world, like trank is a street name for xylazine. And all these medications are also respiratory depressants, but they don't get reversed with Narcan because Narcan can only block opiates. So when I started seeing these spiking deaths starting in about 2017, and I had this knowledge of pharmacology and with anesthesia, my anesthesia training, that there has to be a better way. And it was kind of one of those nagging feelings, like when you pass a family that's stranded on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere late at night, and you think, I could probably help those people. Hopefully at some point, you don't get too far down the road that you can't turn around, but you stop and you help these folks. And it was just this nagging feeling. I had this knowledge, I've got to do something with it. There's so many people who are dying, so many families who are, experiencing this awful tragedy. And it was just a nagging feeling I had to respond to. So here I am.
That is very interesting because you're right. The fentanyl issue, let's just keep it nice and say the fentanyl issue, it's not going away. There's obviously being billions of dollars thrown at it, and it still just continues to get worse. And it seems to be laced in things that people don't even think it's going to be in. So yeah, there's I won't say completely innocent. Sometimes they were actually thought they were getting a different drug, right? So it wasn't necessarily that was completely an innocent situation, but the results are certainly not what the individual intended. They didn't intend on taking that. So certainly a number of, as you mentioned, opportunities for life saving. So you said something there that was kind of interesting to me, and that was that part of the reason you were able to make this transition, not maybe not completely seamlessly, but easily, is because you had some of the pharmaceutical training in being an anesthesiologist. Um, yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense when you think about it. You already knew how a number of these medications would work. You already knew that you had to because of what you did. So as you came to this realization, as you decided to stop and help the family at night, what did that look like? What did those first steps look like? Because even though you may have had this training, starting a whole nother company, doing something completely different, well outside of your realm, uh, and I've been told, you tell me if it was different for you, but I've been told by many, many physicians that they don't teach you business in medical school. You don't have any of that. So now that you have decided you're going to start a business, what did you do then?
Great, great questions. And we could probably spend a whole hour on that alone, Harlan. So You know, um, it's kind of funny. I think the first thing that the first thing I did was I started exploring the merits of this idea. Does this idea have legs? And, that started with kind of reviewing the pharmacology of this medication, specifically how it works in the body and the effects it has and the downsides and the upsides and all that, to make sure that it made sense to even pursue. And then after that, the question became, okay, well, how do I take this to the next level? And I really didn't know. So all I knew was I am here in point A and I need to get to point C, but I have no idea about the landscape in between. So I started reaching out to friends. And a friend of mine, a really good friend of mine, introduced me to a friend of his who was in the pharmaceutical industry. And, talked to him and said, "Hey, Rob, what would you do here?" And he says, "This is outside of what I know, but I can introduce you to somebody." And he introduced me to somebody, and that person was able to help me a little bit. And he introduced me to somebody else. And that person was kind of a business guy, and I had no business training. Like you already said, doctors don't graduate from medical school really with hardly any business understanding at all. And so he did what's called a market assessment, and that looks at, does this even make financial sense to even pursue? Because if there's no money in it, then I'm never going to get the help I need from investors or companies. That's just the reality of the world. So he was really excited. He said, "Yeah, this has legs. This is something that's really, really cool." And I said, "Okay, well, now let's start looking at the science behind it." And started looking at it a little bit and couldn't figure out a way to make it work. Well, that was actually really convenient. That's like, seeing that family and you pass them by and you're like, well, shucks, there's nowhere for me to turn around. I guess I'll just keep going. And there's almost a sigh of relief at that point. All right, well, I tried. I'm just going to keep going. The reality is, as a full-time anesthesiologist, I had a great career and was partner in my group and was making a very good living. Also have a lot of kids, have a mortgage and, college saving plans and all that stuff. And the idea of putting all that aside to chase this wild hare didn't seem didn't seem like the smart thing to do. And I sat on it for a good couple of years. That was 2018 when I first started mulling it. A couple of years goes by, and then around 2020, even pre-COVID, I think it was 2019, I thought, this, if I ever decide to do this, I'm going to need some business training, and didn't know where a career was going to go in medicine. Medicine's changed a lot, and I wanted to open up more doors. So I went to the University of Tennessee. They have an executive MBA program there, and I got my MBA. And it was a fantastic program. I learned a lot. And with that, I learned the basics of how to structure and set up a company should I decide to do that. And then COVID hit, and our anesthesia practice was, I'm going to say, not being run very well. The receipts were down. The practice manager, it was a business guy, very nice, but not very good at what he was doing. And, our incomes were all hurting. And then it became obvious that if I was ever going to do it, now's the time. And decide to take a leap. Have you ever been skydiving, Harlan?
No, that's a perfectly good airplane. I don't see any reason to.
No reason to jump out. And that's kind of how it was. My career was a perfectly good career. There was no reason to jump out of it, except at this point, the engine's on fire and I didn't like the other people in the airplane. So I thought, you know what? It's time to take that leap. And I'll tell you, so I've been skydiving, and that feeling that you get when you first leave the comfort of that frame, the airframe, and you're falling, you just gasp. Like it's hard to catch your breath. Like, oh my goodness, what did I just do?
What have I done?
And what have I done? And that's kind of what this felt like at first. And I decided, so I'd already done the research. I already knew the gist of where I was going and roughly how to get there. But there were certainly a lot of hurdles, a lot of unknown, and a um, just massive amount of personal time and financial investment. And again, I'm a husband, I've got kids, I've got a home, and none of that changed in those couple years. But I decided that, I was going to answer this calling. I feel like that's where God led me. And I did it. And I leaped, and I'm gonna say this as somebody who, found genuine faith in late 2020, early 21. God has led me every single step of the way. Every time I thought I hit a stumbling block, or I wasn't going to be able to figure a way around a problem, God came through. Financing situations, he came through. It's just it's honestly, it's miraculous. It really feels God-led and divine. I don't wanna, preach to your
Yeah.
audience, but it's just my own personal experience, and it's as real as anything else I've ever experienced, in such an amazing way. So, here we are.
But if you're ever going to be led to do something, then it's always better to be led by the Lord because
Amen.
you can make all the plans you want to. He just sits back and laughs and says, "That's so cute."
This has been I'll tell you what, every time I ask God, like, "Are you sure you want me to do this?"
There you go. Yeah.
I see another sign. It's like, "All right, I'm gonna keep going." Maybe he's taking me for a walk to see how long I'll follow him, but I'm just gonna keep right on going until he says stop.
Yeah. Hey, man, I love it. I, I, I feel that as well. But I want to tell you something though. I didn't jump out of the plane intentionally, but after 19 years of the safety of corporate America, they pushed me out of the plane. So it was the same thing. I mean, I was gasping
Yep.
at first as well, but it was the best thing that ever happened. So I will tell you from my experience, and that was back in 2006. So it's been a long time, and I survived. And it's been a true blessing. Now I've almost been out of corporate America now as long as I was in corporate America. So it certainly has been an absolute blessing. Being your own boss, well, never mind. I've been married for 33 years, so I've never been my own. But anyway,
Congratulations.
but only having her as the boss, that's a whole lot better than having a whole bunch of bosses at work and then a boss at home too.
True story. Love it.
So one of the things that you've obviously had to battle during this whole thing is just the crazy pharmaceutical industry in general. And anytime you're doing anything over in that world, there's all kind of regulations and just I can't even imagine. I mean, you're in it, so we we know stuff, we hear stuff. Well, if you're listening, you do, but that's not the same as being in it. What are some of the challenges that you have faced now that the Lord said, "Here, this is what I want you to do, Joe," and you said, "I got you." Now, there's no doubt that I'm sure He helped you overcome some of these, but there had to have been some hurdles that you had no idea were coming, very unexpected. In that world, just a different world. So, can you give us a little insight on what that looks like?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Harlan. The biggest challenge that I've encountered really is the regulatory process in general. Now, I'm only just beginning the part where we're looking at human studies and things like that. But even just getting to this point, there are so many there are a lot of limitations on what we can do, what we can't do. There are rules and guidelines, and they're all built with I think the right intentions. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to protect people. We're trying to make um, medications safe and good for consumers, and that they do what the people expect them to do, and nothing untoward. But in order to get there, you've got to get through the chemistry part of things. You've got to get through um, animal testing is part of it. And when you do all those, you've got to go through various government barriers. So there's an organization called IACUC, and they're tasked with making sure animal welfare is being guarded, and that's a good thing. I like animals. I got a dog, and my kids all love animals, and I'm not here to abuse anything. The reality is that we choose animals before we choose humans when it comes to testing things. And I do think that's the right decision. But all the hurdles and um, friction and pushback that occurred by getting past that committee, it really delayed this process easily a year, probably a year and a half. And when you think about it in terms of life, that's 150,000 people that died while we're trying to make sure that we're protecting, a handful of animals. Um, which, by the way, we're never going to be harmed anyway. Like, I'm not saying like we were going to, do bad things to these animals. They're going to be under general anesthesia when we test these medicines. and they gave so much pushback that, again, 150 people, 150,000 people died in the process, and about 1,500 kids, and it's kind of tragic. That's just one quick example, but other things, really simple things, getting the compounds and the chemicals needed to make these medications, grief. Like, I'm not trying to buy heroin or, other illicit substances. In fact, it probably would have been easier and probably just go out to a cigarette. You gotta get downtown. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, pass me some of those drugs. But all the hurdles, and you got to sign off on stuff, and you get permission, and oh, we can't send it to you because you don't have a pharmacist. Even though you're a physician and you're a pharmaceutical company, you got to have a pharmacist on site, and it's like, so I basically had to use an intermediary, make sure that we followed all the rules. And so basically just had the medication sent there so they weren't in my hands, even though these are non-controlled substances. I wasn't using any drugs, obviously. Um, it's just, it's cumbersome. It's very expensive. And we've only just begun the expense part of things. Um, we hope by the end of 25, we'll be doing our first human trials. And just a small study with about 40 people, these are like just the early stages of it, it's gonna cost over $1,000,000. And that's all those expenses, um, they ultimately, lead to the consumer and increase the price of the medication. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to keep this medication as inexpensive as possible because we know that the more expensive it gets, the less accessible it will be to those who need it. If it was, dirt cheap, we could literally, put a box on every street corner of this medication and just, let people just dig into it when they need it. But the reality is that it's not going to be quite that cheap, but we're working our very hardest to keep it inexpensive.
Yeah, and that that's what I saw that I believe was so vitally important, and of course, why I wanted you to be on the show, Joe, is because this is not an ulterior motive. This is not something that the list of side effects is longer than the name's always going to be long, right? Because the name's just some kind of crazy thing. But then you look at all the side effects, and wow. No, I think I'll take a pass on that one. But that's not the case in this. And like you said, it's actually the primary ingredient was approved back in the 60s. It's been very safe, been used for years. But that ingredient alone doesn't get it causes the reaction you're talking about where people become competitive. So you're formulating or have formulated a a, a drug now that alleviates that. So that I'm sure you could ask any first responder if they would rather help someone just trying to kill them or they would rather hurt someone that is breathing on their own and is kind of sedate.
You're saying it right.
I want number two.
Number 2, please. Yeah, yeah, for sure. And here's another thing. So I did talk to a lot of first responders, and I talked to both people with substance misuse disorder and their family members, and talked to them about what they wanted in a medication. They all reported that they would much rather stay asleep while this process is going on. And when I talked to the first responders, I said, "Well, what do you think about this Narcan right now?" And they said, "Well, it's effective a lot of times, but sometimes it requires so many rounds of this medication that 10, 15 minutes has passed, and we've used 10 doses. Well, 10 to 15 minutes of not getting oxygen to the brain results in brain damage. So sometimes the person that wakes up from this situation isn't doing as well as you'd like them to. So that's another reason why we developed this medicine is to try to, or I should say the reason why. One of the parameters is that we wanted to develop this medicine in such a way that it would respond very quickly. So we're looking at about a minute and a half worth of response time compared to 2 minutes for every dose of Narcan.
So during this journey, and you may have had a taste of this already as being an anesthesiologist and working whether you're working in a hospital or working in an ambulatory surgery center or wherever you may have been practicing at. What have you learned in that journey and also now being in the pharmaceutical side about some of the ills of the US healthcare system?
All right, so let's narrow it down. Specifically, what do you want me to talk about?
Well, what is in your experiences, this is really what I'm curious about. In your experiences, what are some of the things I think that maybe surprised you or you didn't see as an anesthesiologist about the healthcare system and some of the insanity that's there because you may have been a little bit guarded by your practice and guarded by a hospital or surgery center where you didn't know how some of the other things worked in there. Uh, you probably had some interaction. Maybe you might have had might have been your office did it interaction with insurance companies or other entities, hospitals. You know how the payment structures work. Now that you stepped away from that, you're kind of in a different world. Even looking back on that and looking at your experience now, what are what are some of the things that you see the US healthcare system, could do to help fix itself? Or is that even possible?
I think anything's possible. My grandfather, who passed a few years ago, God rest him, he used to say, "Anything that's conceivable will eventually come to pass." And to me, in regards to something being fixable, if there's enough motivation, absolutely, it can and will be fixed. Now, for my current perspective, from my pharmaceutical world life, I don't really have as much um, exposure to the we'll call it nuanced industry of the healthcare U.S. healthcare system. But based on looking at the system as a whole over my entire career, it's I think one of the biggest issues is that we're making simple things complicated. Something as simple as seeing a patient, connecting with them, talking to them about their needs and desires, and then advocating for them so they get the care that they actually want and need, as I think beginning with good intention has has been messed up by people who are in power, who are in control. And that includes both government and commercial payers. So, to be fair, there was a time, I think back in maybe the 70s or 80s, certainly before my time, that physicians were kind of, it was the wild west of medicine. And you can kind of do what you want and charge what you want. And a lot of people got really rich, but ultimately greed destroys things. And the the insurance companies started pushing back and they started saying, "Well, hang on a second, this doesn't make sense." And they started trying to protect their their interests and their bottom line. And of course the federal government had to do the same. And they started this process called, value-based payment instead of um, fee-based payment or whatever they call it. Instead of, you get a fee for service. Instead of getting paid for doing something, you get paid for doing it well. Well, here's the problem. Define well. Define what metrics are important. And what's important to them may not be important to the hospital or be important to most importantly to the patient. So when I see a patient now as an anesthesiologist, because I still do practice to pay the bills, um, the the patients I see, I go through a checklist. Are they do they meet the criteria to get all these different medications to help prevent them from getting motion sickness? Sorry, post-op nausea and vomiting after anesthesia, which means that now I'm putting additional chemicals into somebody, and it's basically mandated by the government. If I don't do it, I get dinged. I don't get to use my own um, my own medical training and my own system of judgment. I'm forced basically to do what they're telling me to do. Um, and hospitals employ a lot of extra people whose job it is to make sure that all these metrics and boxes are checked and infections are low and all this. So cost of running a hospital is very high, and a large part of those costs are manpower, and a lot of those people, especially the higher paid ones, aren't even treating people. They're treating the payers, and it's such a disaster. If I mean, here's one of the things I fantasize about. If, I had a bajillion dollars sitting in a bank, I would love to study what it would take to build a hospital that literally doesn't take any insurance. no Medicare, no Medicaid, no commercial payers. And then you get rid of all the bureaucrats, you get rid of all the coders, you get rid of all that stuff. And then everybody who's left are people who are just there to take care of people. So, like what you're talking about with your direct to primary care programs, people come in instead of spending 2 minutes with their anesthesiologist, because the anesthesiologist has to see 40 patients that day. The anesthesiologist might only see 4, 5, or 6 patients. Maybe they're not making as much, but you know what? They've got a better job satisfaction. The patients are happier because they're getting more time with their physicians, and they're getting, I think, more attentive care. And I really believe, and I don't have any data to back this up. This is only a suspicion or a belief. I really believe that if you were designed a hospital that way, by the time you look at how much money people spend on their health insurance and on their copays and their deductibles, that they could literally get a knee replacement surgery for less money. When you think about all the overages, it's wild how much we spend in healthcare and how little we get in return. I'd like to see that change.
All right. Well, I got good news for you. There's folks out there already doing that.
Oh, I
Um,
love it. Tell me more.
yeah. So there is a number of surgery centers, not hospitals, but surgery centers that can do, say, knee replacements, shoulders, multiple different things, um, that do not take any form of insurance whatsoever. They are 100% cash pay. They do bundles. In other words, if you are going to have a knee replacement, your initial visit, your knee replacement, and all physical therapy are actually bundled into one single cash price. There's a number of them all over the country. It was kind of started a number of years ago, that movement by Dr. Keith Smith, an anesthesiologist, in of all places, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. And his surgery center, the Surgery Center of Oklahoma, is still thriving and doing very, very well. The reason it hasn't happened in hospitals, and you probably know this side of it, is that physicians are not allowed to own a hospital. And because physicians are not allowed to own a hospital, I personally believe that's one of the reasons why, because the people that own the hospital are more interested in making a profit, right? Even your nonprofit hospitals make a whole lot of money, whole lot of money, but they don't have to pay taxes on that. The most recent numbers are N all not together, combined nonprofit hospitals in the United States get $28 billion in tax breaks per year and provide $16 billion in charity care. So I'll take that every single year. That's a little bit of a nice bump right there. If I only have to provide 60% of my stuff to get that benefit, that seems like a pretty good deal to me. Uh, but yeah, there's a number of those, places, and they have proven out over and over how much less they can be. It is startling how much less that these surgeries are when you go to these ambulatory standalone surgery centers that are physician-owned compared to going to the hospital. We are seeing more and more, I don't wanna speak out of turn here, but there is at least one hospital in Houston, Texas, that is transitioning is slow, to start taking less insurance. Um, my understanding is they're not even taking Medicare anymore. That's a big payer for most hospitals, but they're mostly doing direct contracts now with commercial with companies, not commercial insurance, but with self-funded companies and such. And that is not a physician owned, but it is a physician operated hospital. So the ownership has the hospital and said, okay, you guys run it and provide health care to people. And that's what they're doing. So we'll see how that works out. That's a fairly new endeavor, but I agree with you in the fact that I believe that that's going to be a little bit of a wave of the future. And I think a lot of employers are going to see that and say, look how much money I can save, especially in self-funded plans to go that way. Um, I mean, that's in essence, that's what we're doing as a company as well, is we're doing direct contracts. That's how we avoid some of the high costs and bring your costs down or actually provide you free access to healthcare in many cases. So it's there. Your intuition is definitely right there, Joe, that removing those middlemen and getting a lot of that profiteering out of there can have a huge impact.
That's wonderful. That's good news. I'm glad my intuition was accurate there.
All right. So I know that what you just said is probably part of it, but what other things do you personally believe we can do to bring down the cost of healthcare? Uh, if you may or may not know this number, but in the last time that they did the, I guess so 2023, United States spent $4.8 trillion on healthcare, and 25% of that was administration. To your point earlier, and then another 25 for that percent of that was just fraud, waste, and abuse. So there's 50% of that amount that actually was no care given to anybody. Obviously, if we remove that, but let's be realistic, we're not going to just remove that overnight. But what are some of the things that maybe you have thought about from being kind of on two different sides that we could do, uh, that maybe we didn't just talk about, that could help lower the cost of healthcare as well?
I think something simple that we could do, and I don't know how much of an impact this would be, but I like to work with the low lying fruit. Hospital based physician groups like anesthesia, radiology, emergency medicine. We don't often know how much stuff costs. And a lot of times we'll just choose something because it's right there in front of us, comparing to when we go to the grocery store, we're looking at prices. Well, why would I get this box of cereal instead of that one when it's literally $2 more? Um, and I think if we were more aware of what stuff costs, especially when two items are basically interchangeable, I think that should make I think that would make an influence or make a difference on costs. I like to see less, um, administration. I think a lot of the meetings during my 12 years as a practicing anesthesiologist, I spent, you know, hundreds of hours in meetings with administrators, various people who are basically tasked with, following numbers. And first of all, a lot of those meetings were unnecessary. They could have been an email. Literally, just show me the data or highlight what we need to address. That would have saved hundreds of hours, and those hundreds of hours cost money. I mean, many FTEs. So we can get rid of meetings, we can get rid of administrators. We could stop beating the bushes trying to chase. Okay, so this is another thing. I would say stop beating the bushes, trying to stop chasing the government or these government incentives and programs and bars. And here's the thing: they they announce these metrics as a way to reduce waste, as a way to improve quality of care. That's what they're saying. The reality is they're trying to reduce cost. That's first and foremost. And evidence of that is you're just competing with everybody else. So the top 10% get a bonus, the bottom 10% get penalized, and everyone in the middle is just, you just start. So as everyone gets better, you're 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 just competing. That's all it is. And I think competition's good, but they have all these hurdles and boxes you have to check so that you get fully paid. And it's really a game. I don't think that delivering, 3 or 4 different antiemetics, anti-nausea medicines to folks, it isn't really helping most people. Now, maybe somebody did the math and they said, well, if you treat 100 people and you keep one person from having to stay overnight at the hospital, then that's worth it. Well, and maybe that's the case, but I really think it has more to do with um, giving us hoops to jump through so they can justify not giving that 3% bonus at the end of the year to the anesthesia groups or to the hospitals. And I'd like to see us do away with a lot of those programs. Here's another quick and easy one. I would like to see companies stop producing what I would call sister drugs. So, one ACE inhibitor comes out and now like 10 other ones come out. Or they'll combine, an ACE inhibitor with an alpha blocker. And now it's a much more expensive drug and it doesn't really make sense. There's no real value added to anyone except the company that came out with it.
Right.
So, it's I think some countries like Germany, I think they actually have a rule against that. I don't think you can just produce a similar medication with no additional benefit. Now, some people will say, well, some medications work better for some people than others, but you know, eh, there's a lot of waste in that. We spend billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars on drug development that maybe we don't need to.
Okay. You opened up something there that I think is a good place to kind of jump back on the pharmaceutical side, and that is kind of the sister drugs or the some competition. Well, you guys are a small fish in a big sea of pharmaceutical companies. Some obviously huge, powerful ones out there that we see in the news all the time. Uh, and in that world, there's a lot of copycatting type things. You look at GLP-1s right now, they're all over the place, right? And everyone's coming up with their version of it. You've always got someone who's first, but it doesn't seem like it's very long till other ones are. And sometimes people are doing them almost the exact same time, and it's a race to see who comes up with it. How do you protect your proprietary stuff? And do you know, is there somebody else even out there trying to do the same thing you are? You come up with the idea, but they got tons more money than you, and they say, we're going to throw everything we got at this because we want to be first to the market. Is that a concern? And how do you protect yourself from those type things?
I love that question. And no, I'm not concerned. And here's why. So our formulation is has a patents pending. The company that we have working on the patent, that's all they do with pharmaceutical patents, and they're literally the best company in the world. And they told us, you don't have a worry. Like it's gonna go through. We're just going through the motions. So these companies that you described that have all the money in the world and they are developing, something very similar. Maybe it's the same molecule, maybe it's not. Here's the reality. They're spending they're going to spend orders of magnitude more money than we are. Tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions more. And that means that drug is going to be more expensive. We are being very strategic in in the way we're doing this. We are keeping the cost as low as possible because we want it to stay accessible. There was a company called Kaleo, I think probably about 10 years ago, came out with an auto-injector for Narcan or naloxone. I forget what they called it, FZO or something like that. And the problem is this auto-injector was $500. Well, guess how many people bought it? Basically nobody. So because people who need it can't afford it. And then you're relying on government buyers, and government's like, I'm not spending that. We go through 1 billion of these a day, a year. I mean, exaggerating, of course, but that's just a silly, obscene amount of money. So yeah, I would not be surprised if there are companies working on exactly what we're doing, but I can guarantee you nobody is doing it as cost effectively as we are. And the data that we have that shows how well this medicine is absorbed and the timeline that it works in, it is literally perfect. You can't design. I literally, if I was to, make a wish from a genie, I wouldn't even know what to ask for. It is divine. It's perfect.
So this is this is probably theoretical. Someone developing something as a competition to this, right? One of these big companies. Do they spend more money on it just because they can? In other words, could they be fiduciary? Could they do the same thing that you're doing and keep the costs down and be more fiduciary of the process? Or is it just the fact that they've got the money and they spend the money?
Um, I think they just have higher overheads. They've got big, beautiful buildings. They probably have a corporate jet. Um, I don't even have a corporate car. I drive a VW. I mean, I'm cost effective. Nothing wrong with Volkswagen, but it ain't a Ferrari. It's not a Bugatti. Mm. So, it is what it is. So there's some of that. They travel around a lot. They have these big laboratories. They have a lot of people, and everything costs money. Almost everything I did very, and I'm not patting myself on the back here, but I did very intelligently. I put a lot of thought into the process, into the chemistry. um, was very methodical so that there was no wasted steps, no wasted money, and just being absolutely as frugal as I could be. And I'd say that maybe that's something similar to, maybe a family living on the poverty line. They're not going to go out and spend 750 on a cup of Starbucks every day. Where maybe somebody who makes $1 million a year, no big deal. I'm not even going to miss it. So it's probably a little bit of that. When you only have pennies, you got to be a penny pincher. And when you have lots of money, you just throw whatever money at it. But at the end of the day, you still have to justify your pricing and say, all right, well, if it costs us $100 million to produce this drug, we can't justify selling it for 10. I mean, that doesn't make sense. And here's the other thing, another point too, that a lot of people don't talk about. Many of these companies are publicly owned, and publicly owned companies are beholden to their shareholders. They have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders, which means to maximize profit. I'm private. I don't have to, I don't have a fiduciary responsibility to anybody's pocketbook. I'm doing the right thing for the right reasons. And Lord willing, going to come through just fine.
All right, so down that pathway, you're not beholden to anyone. You're a private company. You want to get this out to people as quickly as possible. We're still probably talking 2, 3, 4 years, uh, hopefully sooner, but probably talking about that time period. Any other ideas? You don't even have to say if you've thought about other things that you want to pursue. You're a pharmaceutical company now. Pharmaceutical companies don't just have one thing, they have multiple things that they're looking to help folks with. Do you have things in the pipeline? Do you have things rolling around in that noggin of yours that you would like to make something that's out there better, or a totally new thing that you're looking at?
Absolutely, Harlan. So yeah, there are a number of therapeutic options I'd like to bring forward. Again, with the same principles of doing the right thing for the right reasons, and basically bringing out medications that are life saving and life changing, and sticking to our principles of not producing any addictive medications. And yeah, so we have a few ideas that are they're on the holding pattern. Everything is time and money limited, more money than anything. And if I had $100 million in the bank right now, I'd absolutely be pursuing it. So with the proceeds from this first launch, what if and when that happens, which I do think it will, and think you're right. I think 3 years is probably a pretty good target. When that happens, there will be more revenue to start funding some of the other medications that are in the pipeline.
So this kind of it's in the same world, but it's a little more, it's different. Maybe you've never looked at this, but I would guess that you have, just because you seem like a very conscientious guy to look at all options. How much time and effort is spent in particular in your company? I know you can't speak that, but maybe you do have a little idea of pharmaceutical. I'm looking at more naturally occurring options, things that are, the end of the rainforest, lost in the rainforest. I'm kind of being silly there, but um, and I asked this question for a very specific reason. I'm gonna give you a little bit of a backstory here. So, my daughter is going to school um, for biology, biochemistry, biology, different things like that. She wants to be a research scientist. She had an internship this past summer where her she got to kind of choose what she wanted to do. Well, she's allergic to penicillin. So her hypothesis was that there's something naturally occurring out there that will kill E. coli. So she would not have to have penicillin if she had, got a coli. And so she would distill a number of different things, common things, stuff that's in your garden, whatever. She was just distilling everything in the world, the 30, 40 different things that they distilled. And then she treated the E. coli to see what it did. And she found a flower. And if I'm not mistaken, it's a red orchid that when it was distilled, it killed the E. coli. And so she was able to put a report, and it was actually put out in a scientific journal, and she had a presentation on it and all this kind of stuff. Freaked her out, by the way. That's not her. She was just she was between her sophomore and junior year. So she's a junior now, about halfway through her junior year, but she was just like, this is crazy. But it locked in what she wants to do. How much time do you believe pharmaceutical, or did y'all look at naturally occurring things? It makes me curious because I think people feel at least a little more comfortable in many cases. I know our family does, doing more natural things than we do synthetic, man-made, what's gonna be the side effect of this type stuff. I saw a funny little deal the other day that says, "Can you imagine being the first people that were trying the mushrooms, right? This one killed Bob. This one right here tasted like steak. This one right here, maybe see Jesus, whatever, and it says I had a conversation with Jesus, who was the first one that did all the different mushrooms and found out which ones were safe, which ones were not. But how much time is spent in that kind of stuff, Joe?
That's a great question, and it's one that I don't have the answer to. Specifically, in the case of the rest pen, I never considered looking for a naturally occurring substance only because to me that's almost the same thing as starting from scratch.
Sure.
Um, and my goal has always been to produce something as quickly and safely as possible. And if we already have a medication that we know is safe, we already know it's effective, we just have to make it work for this purpose. To me, that was the shortest distance that we could go in order to reach the final to reach the goal. Now, in regards to homeopathic remedies or naturally occurring remedies in general, you're going to run into a situation where you've discovered something. Who paid for that discovery? And how are you going to monetize it? Well, great. You don't want to monetize it. That's wonderful. Somebody still has to, if you're going to get this FDA approved, someone still has to pay for those trials, tens of millions of dollars. And if there's no money at the end of it, you're either leaning on a bunch of philanthropists or you just happen to be independently wealthy yourself, which if you are, good on you. So if, you know, someone like your daughter, she discovers this orchid, distills it down, finds that it works, a pharmaceutical company might say, okay, what was it in that orchid that was effective? And they're going to start breaking down those molecules. They're going to say, oh, it was molecule A. Okay, well, let's synthetically manufacture molecule A. They, and they find, yep, it still works great. Molecule A is our winning molecule. Now, what are they going to do? Now they're going to start injecting it into animals, and they're going to see, does it kill the animals? Well, it turns out it does. And so now they've spent, 5 years and, how many ever millions of dollars. And okay, well, moving on. And that's just, and a lot of the meds, a lot of the drugs we have, um, like penicillin, for example, are naturally occurring molecules. We just found a way to produce them much more effectively. Insulin, for example, is another, of course, naturally occurring protein that we harness the power of yeast and gene editing to mass produce, and I think that's great. I just know that if you're going to produce stuff and you need to spend, if you're going to spend money on something and you need investors, you got to find a way to get those investors their money back.
Yeah, and right, that's the key to all of it. Quite honestly, I've been told before that there are a number of medications out there that never came to fruition, that where could have made big differences in humanity, but they weren't going to be money making. There was,
Those are called orphan drugs.
yeah,
Yeah.
uh,
So there's actually an NIH, a branch of the NIH that helps companies developing orphan drugs and drugs for rare diseases. And there's a lot of money in there. In fact, big pharmaceutical companies have discovered that, and they're exploiting those. Exploiting is not the right word. They're following those incentives. They've been incentivized to produce these medicines, and they're doing that. It's very expensive. But if my child had a very rare condition, I would be very thankful that that program existed. So I'm not knocking that.
yeah, and and I get it to a certain degree. I happen to have a very rare, I think they call it an ultra rare genetic disorder, that you know the numbers say there's probably less than 5,000 people in the world that have this. It's not a life-threatening, but it is a lifestyle altering. It causes me pain walking and different things. But there's very little research. There's very little over the years, there's been very little that's been even put towards fixing things for it. If there's less than 5,000 people in the world, who's buying the damn thing, right? So it's kind of a weird deal. I understand that side of it. It was years and years ago, I was seeing a dermatologist uh, for this particular condition, and he happened to also be with the VA. Now, I am not a veteran, but he did invite me to come to the VA. They were doing a cohort there, and there was a whole bunch of physicians. So I sit there on this table, and everyone come in, and the condition affects my feet primarily, and so people would come in and look at my feet and, "Oh, can I touch that?" Well, I don't care, touch my foot if you want to. Anyway, so then they all went back together and they sit down. And then, 2 weeks later, I went and saw him. I was like, "What'd y'all come up with?" These? "Eh, nothing."
Sounds about right.
"Huh, here's some cream."
Oh, goodness.
Like, I mean, at that time, there's a name now, I can't pronounce it, but at that time, they didn't even know what to call it. Uh, this is probably more. In fact, I know it was more than 20 years ago. It was a law, probably 30 years ago. But still, it's kind of funny that was the there was this weird process I went through. I mean, I'm really thinking I'm fixing to get some miracle cure. Some of these super smart doctors that are all getting around are going to come up, sit at this table, and come with an idea. It's like, nah, got nothing for you. Well, it's great to know that you've got some ideas rattling around in that noggin for some future help as well. But without a doubt, uh, our definitely our prayers will be with you on getting the approvals that you need whenever the time comes when you finally get it out there to the FDA and you're able to start that process. Hopefully, at the end of next year, as you mentioned, start the human trials. Everything goes well. Anything that gives people that second chance at life whenever what's out there on the market right now would not have provided that is obviously a huge deal. And, it's a great blessing that you follow the Lord whenever he told you to do this. And I'm sure you scratched your head a little bit and said, say, huh?
Me? You talking to me? I gotta do this?
I like what I'm doing now. Right.
Right. This is way less scary.
And even whenever you first did that, I'm sure that it was just daunting. But then when you actually got over and started, as what you talked about earlier, some of the things that are going on in the pharmaceutical world, like, or you had to many times say, "Are you sure?"
Yeah, and that's when I got the answer. Like, am I really doing what you want me to be doing? I'll get that answer. Like, I would randomly run into people, like on the street or in a hotel lobby. Like, oh, what are you doing? And we talk about it, like, oh, I know somebody you should talk. It's like it's just these random coincidences. Anyway,
There
lot
are no
stuff
such
like
thing
that.
as coincidences. There's no coincidences, Joe. That's
Yep.
yeah. That's the divine leading you where you're supposed to go.
Yep.
But brother, I really have appreciated getting all this information from you, man. I know the audience does too, and we wish you all the very best. As we get further into this process, maybe later next year, as you've got a little bit further along, I'd love to have you back on and get an update on the process that you're going through.
I would look forward to that, Harlan. It'd be an honor.
All right, Joe. Thank you so much for being with us on the Health Wealth Power Hour, folks. Hope you enjoyed this. Uh, Joe, if someone wanted to reach out to you, what's the best place? If maybe someone says, "Hey, this sounds like something great." Maybe he's looking for investors. I'm sure that you would hate to turn away anyone's money, but if someone was interested in getting in touch with you to talk more in depth about this, what's the best way to get you?
Best way is to go to our website, aurospharma.com. That's AUROSPHARMA.com. On there's a contact us link. There's also I believe there's a link tree link on there. You can follow us on our various social media platforms. And we appreciate that because that gives us broader exposure. And we think exposure is going to be really important as we get closer to releasing this medication. We want to give people a chance to save lives.
Absolutely. We'll catch you next time on the Health and Wealth Power Hour. We are out of here.